This session is designed to learn firsthand from a number of producers who are innovators in this space about what they've done, how they've done it, some of the benefits they've seen, and some of the barriers they've faced. Several of them are farming protected land. So we also want to learn more from them, much as we did from Pat Purdy yesterday, about the correlation, if there is any, between their decision to protect their land and to focus on soil health. AFT knows from a couple of surveys that we have done with landowners and producers operating on land that's been protected through the federal Farm and Ranch Land Protection Program, that in general, folks farming land protected through that program have more conservation practices and are more conservation minded than the general population of land operators. This we get from these two surveys. It tells us what I think all of us know instinctively, that folks who are on protected land have a strong conservation ethic, and it's borne out by what they're doing on their land. But we love to learn more from our guests today. So lastly, I think what we're really hoping is that our guests today can help us understand, as land trust staff and public agency staff involved in land conservation, how can we be most helpful in supporting producers and landowners in building soil health, and what's the best role that we can play, and how can we be most helpful. So with that, let me introduce our guests. We are really happy, hailing from Treasure Valley, Idaho, Josie and Clay Erskine, who own and operate Peaceful Belly Farm. So thank you, Josie and Clay, for being here with us. From Union, Oregon, we have Andrea Malmberg, who owns and operates Bunch Grass Land and Livestock. So welcome, Andrea. Nice to have you here. From Marin County, I don't know if he's here yet.
He is, Chris. Lauren is on.
Excellent. From Marin County, California, Lauren Poncia with Stemple Creek Ranch. And from Madera, California, not sure if he's on yet, Matt Angel with Pacific Farming Company.
He is not here yet.
He's not here yet. Okay.
I'll let you know. I'll text you.
Excellent. So what we thought, Andrea and Lauren and Josie and Clay, we thought that we would start with giving each of you around 10 minutes or so to talk a little bit about yourselves, talk about your operation. And we'd like to learn more about you and your operation. We'd love to learn how you're addressing soil health in your operation, what sort of drove you to that focus and the innovative work that you're doing, and again, what some of the benefits are that you've seen as a result of improving your soil health. So this is open. We have offered, if you want to share your screen and show any slides, you're welcome to do that. We know that Andrea has given us some slides to show, and Lauren has some pictures. Josie and Clay, I don't know if you do, no need to if you don't, but how about we start, Josie and Clay, with you all, and then we'll go to Lauren and then to Andrea, and if Matt joins, then to Matt. So Josie and Clay, thank you ever so much for being here. Handing it over to you.
Great. Well, thanks for having us. My name's Clay Erskine, and this is Josie. We operate Peaceful Belly Farm, and we've been in the Treasure Valley and the Boise area for 21 years now. And we operate a diverse market garden, certified organic market garden. So we specialize in mostly vegetables, but also cut flowers. We've had some protein production over the years. And as we've progressed in our farming careers, we've really delved into more education and community outreach, and even some policy work with the soil conservation districts. Currently, the land that we are on now, we just moved to 5 years ago, and we're in the process right now of putting part of it into an agricultural easement. So we have some of that process kind of background as well. I sit on the Idaho State Department of Agriculture Organic Advisory Council, as well as I am a supervisor for the Canyon County Soil and Water Conservation District. And recently I've been going back to school to get my master's in sustainable ag and focusing kind of on soil plant interaction, soil health, those processes. So I'll pass it off to Josie. She can introduce herself.
Yeah, hi, I'm Josie, and things that Clay didn't talk about on our site is that we also make hard cider. So we have a small cidery and we have a farm to fork restaurant. And then we have what we call a community garden or educational. And we have a rare and heirloom greenhouse where we sell starts and a little farm store on our site. And soil health for us began when we began this journey as organic producers. It's just part of the start for ag, and the term soil health came about through NRCS and the practices. And our soil health is really life on life. So our philosophy is how to build more life on our soil. And that life breeds more life to our farm. From a scientific way, I would say that our approach is how do we harness ecosystem services? So knowing that all of this potential is out there to harness, whether it's boron from migrating birds. How am I going to attract those birds to my space so that I could simply access boron from the birds? How do we work with pollinators or beneficials in our crops? How are we attracting those? And are we specific about the beneficials or the pollinators that we want to attract? And so overall, our soil health journey is more of a living ecosystem health for our whole farm. And that is all about life. So we have a very intense but simple composting system that we do. We do a thermophilic compost system for the first year based off of all of the waste from our restaurant and our farm and from our animal bedding. We use wood chips that we can get close by from a mill. We take waste from other ag facilities. We're in Idaho's wine region. That may sound strange to someone from California, but we have about 17 wineries that are around 2 to 4 miles from us. And so we receive their grape waste at the end of the season, and we make these piles that are thermophilic for 1 year. And then based off of the Dr. David Johnson's bioreactor, that composting system, we've created this tonnage system that then we inoculate with worms. And a lot of that compost is fungal based and biologically diverse, and that is a huge part of our application. So at this point on our farm, we are applying no herbicides, pesticides. We are bringing in very little nitrogen at this point, and our hope is within the next few years we see that need for any commercial nitrogen whatsoever disappear from our farm. And as we are building that soil health, we're seeing incredible results also with disease suppression and nutrient density and quality of our food and habitat. But the one thing that we weren't quite ready for is how beautiful soil health and those practices can make a farm in growth, just life, and how many humans are attracted to our farm or want to be part of our farm or visit our farm because our farm is so full of life. We are planting a lot of trees and shrubs, but as soon as I think you get on that soil health journey, then you want to build your pollinators, then you want to build your small bird species, then you see all of the attributes or the ecosystem services that you could add to your farm by just adding plant species and photosynthesizing as much as you possibly can. I'll let Clay finish up and see if he has anything to put.
That was a pretty good summary of what we've been working on. I don't think I have very much more other than we've really seen a boost, both what we call our livestock below ground and then our livestock above ground, which is the pollinators and the native bees that we have on site. So there's a really great linkage between the more biology that you have in your soil, the more biology you see above ground as well. So it becomes, like Josie said, this really dynamic and life-giving ecosystem that works together. So instead of going out to battle every day, like battling weeds and battling pests and battling diseases, we try to create a system where we're working with nature and in a symbiotic relationship so that we're not always trying to use a side, like a pesticide or an herbicide. We're not killing things, we're growing life and we're working with the natural systems that we have in our region. And it makes us a lot more resilient. So when we have drought, when we have heavy rains, or if we have, temperature extremes like this spring, our soil is more resilient, our plants are healthier, they're more resilient. So building your soil creates a more healthy ecosystem and they can withstand a lot more pressures.
Right. And I'll speak to the water. Just like a lot of the West, we saw a lot of water this spring come down. And, as we're driving our valley, we're watching standing water in field for, days at a time. And we're in the arid West where you very rarely see standing water in people's fields. And we're watching fields just full up with water. And you look at those fields and somebody can't even walk through them. And that same time, we're being able to move sheep through our fields. Like we're still moving our sheep from pasture to pasture when our neighbors around us have, about 8 to 10 inches of standing water. So that just shows how much creating that underground biology does for your system. If we still can move livestock with this massive amount of water and we saw no effects to that ground that we were moving on. We didn't see any trampling. We didn't see any devastation of some of those areas that we were putting the sheep out into, even though the whole valley is experiencing this waterlogged. And that was a big eye-opener for me looking at our land that way. I think that's probably
So basically, as your soil health builds, you get more functional nutrient cycling and then more functional water cycling. So in the arid West, the better your soil health, the more holding capacity you have and the more your soil is a sponge. So when you do have these extremes in water, you can hold on to every drop. So the water doesn't pool and run off and erode. It soaks in and stays there. And so it's really great to build that capacity so that as we have these more climate extremes, you can hold on to all the water you can in drought situations, but then also utilize all the water in heavy rain situations like California is having now, so that you can soak that up and store that versus just having it run off into the waterways and create problems. I think we're over our 10 minutes of intro. So we'll continue continue to chime in.
How you guys sleep and when you have time to do that, I don't know, given all that you have going on and that you casually talk about a cidery and a restaurant.
We sleep very well.
The community garden. It's super impressive all that you are doing. Before we move on, let me stop and see if there are any questions right now for Clay and Josie about anything they've said thus far.
I just wanted to say yippee yahoo or something like that, because whatever you said, it was just really resonated with me. We don't live that far away from each other, and all that you are doing and how you have connected the other ecosystem processes are just really fantastic to soil health.
Yeah, amen to that, Andrea. So, oh, go ahead, Josie.
There's a question from Jim about soil tests, and we do the PLFA test is the test that we do, and we do a lot of those. I think we probably do. You don't want to know, but maybe like nine a year. So we're doing a lot of testing, but we're really only interested in our biology growth, and that's what we're testing for.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Okay, so we will have plenty of time after everybody to continue on with questions from everybody. But right now, Lauren, how about we go to you? Again, tell us a little bit about yourself, about your operation. How does soil health figure into it? What are your experiences with that? What are some of the benefits? What are some of the challenges? So Lauren did share with us a couple of slides that we are going to put up as Lauren is talking. And if everybody can mute themselves, we can try and eliminate some of this feedback. So Lauren, let me turn it over to you.
Awesome. So thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. And I do have a few slides to show. I'll just tell you, when I want to switch to the next slide, or they're basically pictures, but my name's Lauren. I'm a rancher out in Northern California. Some of you may know where San Francisco is. Go up about 55 miles up the coast, and that's where our ranch is. I'm a fourth generation. My great grandfather came from Garzano, Italy in 1897, and we as a family have been continuously farming and ranching ever since. I went away to college, after working and growing up on the ranch, and I thought for sure I was going to come home and be a full-time rancher. And really what I realized about my junior year of college was there wasn't economic opportunity for me there. So I went to work in corporate America and sold veterinary pharmaceuticals all over the country and got to see some really cool, amazing operations, both conventional and organic, around the world. And when I was doing that, I couldn't stop thinking about the ranch and how I could get home and how I can continue doing what we're doing. So about 18 years ago, I came home. We were living in Sacramento, me and my wife, and I came home from working on the ranch one weekend and said, hey, we need to go back home and try and make this a real business. And I'm perfectly okay to try and fail, but we have to at least try, because I don't want to wake up one day and say, what if? And so that was the start of Stemple Creek Ranch. Prior to 18 years ago, I'd been in the business, but it wasn't like, I didn't have a lot of skin in the game, and it wasn't my sole income. And so we moved back to Marin. We had since you guys are from Land Trust, I think this is an important part of the story, but we had that very interesting conversation with my parents before we moved home. And we said, hey, Mom and Dad, we want to move home and we want to continue the ranching business. But quite frankly, we don't want to do it with you. We want to buy all your cattle and lease all your land and do it on our own. And as many of you know, that's like a very hard conversation to have, but it's probably the single most important conversation for us, and the single best thing that we've ever done in our lives is go away, work on our own, and then come back to the ranch instead of just assume the next generation was going to take over and what the ownership structure was that like and everything. So we're super proud of what we've created. We started, there was no Stemple Creek Ranch 14 years ago. We came up with this label and a 5-page website, and we started selling our beef and lamb and pork direct to consumers here in the Bay Area. If you haven't read the book, The Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan, that's what actually got me motivated to sell direct. Before that, we were basically selling whole loads of cattle to the highest bidder anywhere in the country. And so we'd sell to Harris Ranch, or we'd sell to Coleman Natural in Colorado. We'd sell to all these places. And we'd get the data back from the cattle. They did really well, but about 30% of them would get sick. And I was like, why are we doing this? Let's just sell all direct to consumers. So that was the start of our business. Another important part, oops, I never hit my timer because I could talk for an hour and a half if you let me. I'm gonna hit my timer here. So another important part of our business is we've always done the dance with Mother Nature, or we've tried to do the dance with Mother Nature. Once in a while we step on each other's toes, but a lot of the things that I just heard from the previous speaker, like I aspire to be more like them. It sounds like they're totally awesome with soil health and their composting program, and I want to go see with my own eyes, because in our area, some people look at me as one of the leaders in regenerative, and I think that we are. But what I really feel like is that we're just at the beginning stages, and we have so much more to learn. And we're doing a lot of really progressive work, but we don't have it perfect yet, and we're constantly learning and adapting and changing. And that's what makes ranching or farming really exciting, is because every single year it's different, and it's a dance with Mother Nature. It also makes it frustrating at times. So it's just interesting to go. The other thing is all of our land is protected by Marin Agricultural Land Trust, and my dad was a founding board member for Marin Ag Land Trust like 40 plus years ago. I was the chairman of the board and on the board for 10 years, and my wife's actually on the board now. And Marin Ag Land Trust, most of you know about them already, but it's been an amazing local agricultural land trust. It's protected about 55,000 acres right north of San Francisco. And it's been a really awesome story and very, very fun to watch grow. And I was just a kid when it started and when it was formed. So it's even more fun to continue the work and see the good work that we've done. On our ranch, we were actually the first carbon farm plan in the country, or one of the first, us and Strauss. And we basically, before that, what I considered myself was a grass farmer. So we would put nitrogen, not nitrogen in the form of manure, cow manure, on the pastures. We'd grow lots of green forage, and it was like, oh man, we're doing a great job. We're grass farmers. But what I didn't realize is what was going on in the top 6 inches of soil or deeper, and how carbon affected it. So I raised my hand to be one of the demonstration sites for the Marine Carbon Project. And what that really did is blew my mind to the possibilities of what's going on in the soil and what's going on below the surface of the soil. And since then, we've really started learning more and more and more. Part of our carbon farm plan is a whole basket of different tools that we use or implement. Some of them are planting riparian areas. Some of them are compost. We actually make on-farm compost, but we also buy some compost and put it on our pastures. We reseed with perennial plants. A lot more now, we pay a lot more closer attention to forbs. So instead of grass and legumes, we want forbs, grass and legumes. And we have mobs of cattle that we move around the ranch, and sheep. And we try to mimic Mother Nature within the fences. So we're never going to be perfect at this because there are fences, but we try and mimic Mother Nature by having organized disturbance and eating the grass in front of them, stomping on the grass below them, pooping on the grass behind them, help to build more soil health, never have bare soil, always have a living root in the ground, and basically try to photosynthesize year round. Because when we're photosynthesizing, we're pulling CO2 from the atmosphere, pulling it down into the soil. We want to have stable carbon, so we're not disking or plowing. But our biggest limiting factor in terms of soil health on our ranch is air in the soil, because there's lots of compaction from cattle or tractors, historic tractor and plowing. There's lots of compaction. There's not lots of soil aggregates in a lot of these places, and there's not lots of life deeper than 6 inches. So what we're trying to do is that, and a big aha for me is we're trying to build soil up instead of down. Originally, I was like, well, let's get some rippers and rip through here and build the soil down. But really what it comes down to, and the mindset change, is we have to build the soil up. And when we decrease compaction, the soil actually rises, and the more life you have in the soil actually rises. And you can see it if we're paying attention along the fence lines, because the fence lines are higher than the fields. And that could be erosion, or it could be compaction, or it could be a combination of both. And so it's fun sometimes to take a soil test under the fence or on the side of the road, and then in the pasture, and see the difference in biology or microbiology and all that type of thing. So I think it's a good minute to flip my slide to the next slide, please. Or the next picture, please. So this is out my parents' kitchen window, and that's Stemple Creek. That's our namesake. And Stemple Creek in this picture, this is 1990-ish, 89. And this was normal my whole life growing up. And basically, that's brackish water that comes all the way from the ocean to the bridge. And the creek is heavily denuded. And the cattle had 100% access to the creek. They would drink out of the creek. There was no other waters, upland waters. And there was no vegetation in the creek, frankly, because the cattle would eat whatever was greenest. And that was down at the creek. So go to the next slide, please. This is the same creek about 10 years later. My dad, I'm standing on his footsteps, basically on his shoulders. He decided to fence off the creek with some partners, local RCD, and another group called the Shrimp Club back then. It's now Point Reyes, it was Point Reyes Bird Observatory. Now it's Point Blue. And the Shrimp Club brought school kids out to the ranch to actually fence off the riparian area and plant trees. And so what this does is gives me hope about, in my short lifetime, we can create a massive amount of habitat. And Mother Nature's super resilient. If you just give her space and let her have time to recover and rest, it will 100% happen. So go to the next slide, please. This is the same riparian area in 2018. So as you can imagine, it's beaming with wildlife now. There's lots of different biodiversity there. We actually grow more forage and grass now than we ever have, because by default, we fenced the creeks, so we had to rest certain areas. And I started paying attention to, man, we grazed that once heavily with a large amount of cattle. Look at what the grass grows back to look like later. So go to the next slide, please. Oops. Oh, maybe there isn't a next slide. There should be one of all three, but maybe it's not.
Oh, Lauren, I'm sorry. I didn't put that one in there. What I'll do is
okay, no problem.
Look, there's
Yeah,
the first
basically, there's 25 years later. That's the first picture. Go to the next, to the last one. 25 years later is this, and it's just a dramatic difference, and it gives us a huge sense of pride. But it also helps us grow more grass, and it also helps us be a massive carbon sink. So when we did this originally, it was for water quality. We wanted better water quality in the creek. So we wanted to decrease erosion and water quality. Now, this is a very big part of our carbon farm plan, because that's a huge carbon sink. I mean, the amount of carbon we grow in the creek is massive compared to some of the uplands. But it's also, I'm a big hunter and outdoorsman and fisherman. And I think through, like, what can we do to help repair the damage that we've done in the last 150 years? And this is my way of contributing to make Stemple Creek flow again. And what I'm hoping to do now, we just did in the last 2 weeks, is we put in some beaver dam analogs. There's no beavers in our area yet. And some of you farmers or ranchers or people around the country might cringe when I say I want beavers. But in our area, we have no irrigation. And I actually want beavers to go into that creek and chop down those willows and slow the water so that we have leaky weirs all the way back to Petaluma to create habitat for the steelhead and the salmon to come back in to the waterways and actually create even more thriving biodiverse ecology and on our ranch there. So we're super stoked about that. One thing I didn't hit on is we also have, we have about 12 different enterprises on our ranch. And like the previous speakers, we have entertainment, education. We have a party barn that we took an old barn and we fixed it all up. I call it an education barn. If you're a county person, it's an education barn. If you're a partier, it's a party barn. And we bring people there. They eat our meat. We have 4 little Airbnbs that people can stay at on the ranch. It's a really awesome competitive advantage, but also a very awesome education space that we can use. Chefs come and stay there. Nike's coming next week to come and stay to buy our leather for their shoes. We have tomorrow, actually, I have the Culinary Institute of America from Singapore coming. This is their 10th trip to the U.S. to see our regenerative practices and to stay on the ranch and to learn from us. Whoops, there's my timer. That means I've probably already spent 12 minutes, but that was a 10-minute timer. And then we sell all of our meat direct to consumers all over the United States, but our main focus area is Bay Area. We want to be the Bay Area and California's regenerative grass-fed finished beef producer, and that's kind of the direction that we're going. So that's our introduction.
That was a fantastic introduction. Thank you so much, Lauren. I will say you are the first farmer I've ever heard who has said wonderful things about beavers. That is not a...
Well, I don't have any yet. I might be cussing them here in a couple years, but if I go to try and put a dam in my creek right now, I'm going to jail. But a beaver can do it for free and not go to jail. So that's the dance.
We do have a question. This is a comment from Carrie York. Yay, BDAs. I'm not sure what the BDAs refer to, but then she says, can you talk more about your rotation schedule?
Yeah, BDAs are beaver dam analogs. You're going to hear about them a lot more in the future because there's a lot more funding coming this direction. But our rotation schedule is we don't really rotate as much as what we call pulse grazing. We'll skip 3 fields to go to the field that's ready to graze versus go from field A to B to C to D. We bounce around the pastures, so sometimes we might move a group of 500 animals, a mile to go to the next pasture that's ready instead of just opening the next gate. And one thing that I'm envious of is being able to move cattle when you get 40 inches of rain in an area like ours. The winter this year's winter was actually atrocious for us to move cattle around because we were pugging and we almost had to spread everything out. And you have to know your context on your own property, right? But every ranch is a little bit different. And since that question leads to another question about being regenerative and being ready for Mother Nature's, what she tolls out is last year in October, we had 14 inches of rain in 2 days. And that's unprecedented for California. And our ranch soaked it all in. And it was awesome. And it really blew my mind about how it soaked it all. And we had 0 runoff on our ranch. All of my neighbors, and this is not a negative about our neighbors, it's just the fact of what's happening right now. And everybody hasn't really adapted the practices. All of their dams and ponds filled up. Ours was still empty at the end of the 14 inches. And it blew my mind because I was like, we're coming out of this drought. We wanted more water. Our dams didn't fill up at all. So the next 3 inches, they did fill up, but it really blew my mind. And I have great video of it, of sheeting water coming off of the fence line of my neighbors, and ours was just soaking right in. It's pretty amazing.
That is amazing. That's a terrific story. But why don't we move on to Andrea? And I assume Clay and Josie and Lauren, you were able to stick with us. So if we can go to Andrea, then we could. Good. Thank you, Josie. If we can go to Andrea, and then we can open it for questions after Andrea is done. So Andrea, to you. And I think, Andrea, you had some slides. So Beth is going to put them up. And there we go.
I am so inspired by the land stewards before me, and I just love all that you're doing. And I think we kind of know each other like through this mycelium that we work in, of this regenerative network of folks that really see importance of empowering decisions at the soil surface. So I really want to talk a little bit. I saw the amazing group of people that we have here from all over the country, and I wanted to give a little bit of perspective because I have ranched now in Wyoming, and well, I was raised on a ranch, but then didn't really have decision-making power, but had regenerative making power in Wyoming and Oregon. And so I wanted to give a little perspective on that. So I just want to talk about monitoring and a steward's perspective, because I know that working with land trusts, which we've done for many, many years, monitoring is a sign of how do you have data to prove what you're doing is okay, or that you're not violating certain laws, or with the Blue Mountain Land Trust, which we work with very closely in Oregon, they really want to see ecological uplift. And so they're just kind of cutting edge from my perspective on how they do it. So one perspective that I want to give is monitoring. So this is in Wyoming. And so just from a producer's perspective, what do you do? And so our range con, a BLM range con, Bureau of Land Management, range conservationist, we were able to, he said, if you have data, you can increase your numbers on public lands. And so this is the increase in numbers that we had over about a decade. And then this is the other data that we had. And so they really wanted to have a range score that wasn't too high. And so, which is a little strange to me, but that is what they wanted. But they had to make sure that they had good pronghorn deer habitat as well. And so at that time, we were just using basic monitoring that the BLM wanted us to do. So then in the early 2000s, we started exploring carbon markets. And so this was like, at the time was the Chicago Climate Exchange. And this issue of additionality and permanence was really a issue. So this picture is standing on a bridge at the same moment. So the picture on the left, which is green, taken, and then the other one was just downstream. And so we couldn't show additionality. And what that means is that we couldn't show that we had any more carbon. And so what I'm trying to get at here is this issue of ecosystem processes and focusing on one indicator. So I love what Paul Zoner said is chasing carbon is like searching for a black cat in a dark room that is not there. So the picture on the left, we have probably twice as many cattle. The creek is not fenced out. They actually utilize that pasture. And I think you can even see on the uplands the difference in kind of the aura of the grasslands as well. And just to note that this was taken at high noon. And so I call this standoff at high noon, if anybody likes good Westerns. So in the early 2000s, we were being threatened on public lands to get our cattle off because the idea that livestock hurt sage grouse. So this is my husband, Tony, doing some research with sage grouse. And so what we were able to show is that we had data, and actually the BLM, the Fish and Wildlife Service, did not have data. And what we were able to show is that we were able to have one of the most productive places for sage grouse in the sagebrush steppe of Wyoming. So we kind of got a little antsy, like people do, I guess, when they're on the Oregon Trail. So we moved from the Wyoming-Oregon Trail to Oregon, and we bought some CRP land, Conservation Reserve Program land. And so this place was 9 times more productive than Wyoming, but it was undergoing mass desertification. In it, you can see there's like smooth brome, evidence of like people trying to have farming and all of that. But what we found is that 40% of the CRP payments in Union County, Oregon went out of state. So this is a little bit of data that we have about monitoring. And so, and with carbon, I think you can really see the pictures there of how the change has been made. We were so excited in 2013 when the carbon from 0 to 10 centimeters went to from 3.31 to 4. But then it went down again. But look what you're seeing there at the soil surface. So we do all of this work through holistic plan grazing. We do not do mob grazing. We do not do rotational grazing. It is holistic plan grazing. Every place is different. Every year is different. If Lauren came here to manage this place for like, hey, Lauren, can you help me? We need to go on vacation. He would do a different grazing plan than we would do here. And so this land, we were able to, what we found from our monitoring data is that there was a whole bunch of hydrophytic plants. We have really old water rights. And we lease that water to put back in stream for Chinook salmon. And without irrigation, the production increased from 4,470 to 7,800 pounds per acre without irrigation. So no labor, no water. I mean, labor is like nice labor, like, oh, let's just move the cows. It's really very pleasant. So this is what it looks like with our monitoring, our plant basal cover. This is why the production increased so much. Went from 25 to 55%. We had a much higher leaf height. The species diversity improved. The desired plants improved. Our undesirables just like were no longer evident. So like Canada thistle. That Canada thistle and the thistles that we had were super important though. They helped us break up the soil surface and create aeration into the soil. The most important factor is that we need air, not water, as we grow in these what we call brittle environments. And this is just really profound to me. So in June of 2020, I think, so we had that heat dome in the Pacific Northwest. It was 116 degrees here. You can see it was smoky. Tony, my husband, is wearing a mask, not because it was COVID season at that time, but because it was so smoky in June. So far on to the right, the soil temperature in that dairy pen where we have that monitoring data was 89 degrees Fahrenheit. And then on a place that we bought in 2018, only managing it for a year, the soil surface was covered. However, it was compacted because of too much irrigation. And it was 146 degrees. So this is how that same spot where this 146 degrees was. So this was in the brick that Tony's holding is in 2019 before he started doing any management on that property. And in 2021, the same area is showing this aerated soil, these roots working for a living, having some air, not being so drunk on water. So the monitoring we use is EOV, Ecological Outcome Verification. It is outcome-based. It's relevant to your context. It relies on being steward first, meaning that data doesn't matter for anybody if the person at the soil surface doesn't gather that data, understand that data, and makes management changes. It's also scientifically sound, and there's some minimal effort to provide inference. So most of the soil carbon data and these markets around soil carbon, I think you can hear the frustration in my voice about it, is that it's expensive, it's not steward first, and it takes a lot of effort to actually mean anything, especially on large landscapes that we're working on. So here's some of the indicators of EOV that we have. And so I want to say that monitoring is not a magic pill. I just love this picture because I have no idea who's giving the pill to the goat. So that's probably not very fair, but it was a free thing on the internet that I could get. But I do know this woman who is studying what she's seeing on her own land and contemplating how she's going to make decisions. And here's a really great example of how that happens. And so this is my friend Dallas Hall DeFries and Nicole Masters. And Nicole Masters came to our place after we had just 1 year of managing holistically, and she's like, how many animals did you have here? And I'm like, oh, we had 72 pairs in this 40 acre for a pretty short amount of time. And she's like, why isn't there any shit? And I'm like, I don't know, dung decomposition. And so when we started doing monitoring, looking at the soil surface, she found a mushroom, and that is why.
Andrea, I'm just going to jump in to say if you can take just another minute or two, that would be great, because we have one more speaker to get to.
Yeah, I'm done. So
Right.
I just wanted to say that we have an ecological outcome monitoring for organizations specifically focused on land trusts coming up in at the Sienna Ranch in Lafayette, California. And we'd love to have you join us to show that the land that you're having under conservation easements are showing ecological uplift. That's it.
Great, thank you so much. And I'm sure people, if we can come back to that ecological outcome monitoring, that would be great, because I think people would love to learn more. But we are joined, thank you so much, Andrea. In the interest of time, I think what we'll do is that we will go to Matt, since you were here. Thank you for joining us. And then we will, if people have questions for any of our guests, please feel free to put them in the chat. So Matt, welcome. What we are asking our guest panelists to do is take 10 minutes to talk about a little bit about your background, a little bit about your operation. And what I think folks are most interested in this space is sort of how did you come to a focus on soil health? What kind of practices are you doing to improve soil health, and what benefits and value do you see to that? So let me go back to something that we talked about with Clay when we were talking before this session. And Clay, you talked about how many farmers and that you and Josie are surrounded by many conventional operations, not organic, and that you see that a lot of farmers are sort of, focused on an input cycle, and that trying to sort of break out of that, like getting off of that cycle into a more regenerative system is difficult. And so I'm wondering your suggestions for folks who are working with farmers, ranchers, landowners on how they can help get folks to take that first step.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think it has to do with context too. A lot of the times when you talk about soil health and regenerative health and the NRCS soil health practices, it relates a lot to animal production. So permanent pasture systems or grazing systems. And so I think when you get into a situation where you're in a row crop, small seeded vegetable type of situation, it becomes more difficult to integrate soil health practices. So depending on the context of the landowner or the landowner and the land manager, what the overall goals are and what the production system is, what you can implement. So a grazing system is a little bit more, I wouldn't say amenable to some soil health practices versus, I guess, an example would be around us is there's a lot of sugar beet production and onion production here in the valley. And so people need to get into the cropping system really early in the season. And so usually the ground is bare fallow over the winter. And so that means just bare ground, either sprayed out chemical, nothing growing for the entire winter, so that they can get in as early as possible to get the seed in the ground and get a crop growing fast enough. And so then you open up that soil for wind erosion, which is a big thing here because we don't get a lot of rain. But so having that producer jump into a different type of growing is really scary. So number one, you might have large production loans where a producer goes to a bank and gets a lot of money from the bank to buy seed and fertilizer and chemical and everything that they need to produce. And if they veer out of the production model that is given to them by the university, they're no longer eligible for funding from a bank. They're no longer eligible for crop protection insurance if something goes wrong. So convincing someone to put in a cover crop or just do a small step in a regenerative direction can be tricky. And so in those types of situations, it's almost a crisis that makes them change. So planting sugar beets in the spring this year, and there's consistent 50-mile-an-hour winds, and all their sugar beet seed actually like blow out of the dirt and down the road, and they lose their crop because of that. That might motivate a producer to do something different and maybe integrate some soil health practices so that they can get that stability in their soil so that it doesn't just all blow away. And then, so it's contextual, I think, in a lot of ways of getting a producer. And then you might have a situation where the land trust is working with a landowner, like we talked about, but the landowner isn't the actual manager of the farm. And how does the three people involved work together toward a sustainable goal? And sometimes producers have different ideas of sustainability than the landowner, and then the landowner may have different ideas of sustainability than the land trust. So coming together is also a process. Hopefully that answered your question and didn't
Yeah, no, that's really
ramble too much.
helpful. That's really helpful, and I was struck by what you said about that it sometimes takes a crisis to get that shift. The last couple of days we've talked a lot about the sort of other avenue is to start small, do a backfield, do one field, whether do it somewhere where your neighbors can't see so that there's no embarrassment if something doesn't go right, or otherwise you do it in the front because you want people to see that you're trying something different. But it's interesting to think, and I think you're probably right, that crises can cause people to say, oh, I have to do something different now. Let me ask Clay and Josie another question, because Clay, you just mentioned it in terms of sort of the added factor of there might be a production, a third party sort of that between grower, owner, manager in between. But it sounded that you and Josie had been on rented land for a lot, and I'm curious what that, being a lessee for quite a long time, what were some of the challenges and what are some of the lessons learned from working with probably an absentee landowner and trying to build soil health and ecological function when you were on rented land?
Yeah, I mean, we leased ground around Boise for 15, 18 years. And so just the ecological benefits of working with soil health, we've always been doing because we were certified organic and we didn't have a lot of money for inputs. And so that was just kind of our overall philosophy. I think we came into some friction with landowners because of the development in the Treasure Valley. Farmland is really being converted to subdivisions very rapidly, and the land is very valuable for people to sell to development. And so the friction came from us wanting a little bit more stability when we were going to plant long-term crops like apples or things that we wouldn't really see a return on our investment for a number of years, and wanting the landowner to, we didn't necessarily want to own the land. We just wanted them to put it into an easement so that we knew that it was going to be there in perpetuity. And they weren't, for one reason or another, a number of landowners weren't really wanting to take that step. And so that led us to purchase our own land and then work to get it into an easement so that it can be protected into the future. So I think it can come from both ways. The landowner may want to put in an easement to save the land, or, I mean, maybe more rarely, a producer might want that stability to know that the land will be in farming for the future. A lot of the urban farmers in Boise came up against that in rented ground. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, there's some programs in California where there are beginning farmer opportunities where they can come in and operate on a piece of land that is protected under a land trust, and then have that opportunity for a beginning farmer to come in and not have to put out that big amount of capital to purchase land to secure that piece for the longevity. But it's not in Idaho. We don't have that option here. So yes, it's definitely something where if we want young people to be farmers and to continue farming, we need land access, and not that nobody's going to be able to make money buying a piece of land at development prices. And so land that is in an easement that potentially could be either leased or purchased at a reduced price is really great for the younger generation that wants to do this, but it's really, really difficult to jump into as an industry.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I would say that many of the land trusts on this call appreciate that completely, understand that, trying to figure out ways to address that. And I think certainly from American Farmland Trust is that we tout the importance of conservation easements, and particularly of purchased agricultural conservation easements, as a way to promote land access. Does it necessarily make it affordable for all? No. And so many of us are working on additional tools, but it is something that I think the community collectively understands the challenges and the needs. Andrea, yes.
Yeah, so one thing I wanted just to highlight what Clay said as well is that the banking industry and how you get funding. And so I've known many producers that have been wanting to put degraded farmland back into grazing land, and the bank won't let them do it because the bank wants to rely on the every 5-year crop failure of wheat or whatever. And so these policy changes also really need to be heightened in terms of what can we do to make sure that we can have people that want to farm, and focus on the. I mean, I don't feel like the banking industry is that secure. So I feel like how can we change that? I don't know the answer to it, but I think it needs to be changed.
I think I'm in.
That's a great point. Okay.
You know, I listened, and I think the changing point is that things get so bad that people recognize they have to change. And so where I farm is in the center of California. It's what we call the rain curtain, which is Merced. So if you put your finger in the center of California, we're south of that. Our average rainfall can be, the last 2 years has been 4 inches. So cover crops, have been really, really important because we've got permanent cropping systems. Now, I'll say specifically almonds is kind of where I started. Actually, my dad had been putting cover crops in our vineyards for a long, long time. We kind of got out of that practice because it was a single species, it was ryegrass or something like that. But in our trees, what had happened is that we were starting to get a lot of infiltration problems, as far as the soils. And I think that's what happens, to a lot of folks is that, we don't break up the soil. We're always, we're kind of in the same rows, the same tractor, our tires are in the same track. So, and in the spring, we'll spray for, we'll put fungicide in so it's wet. So over the last 9 years, my soils have got compacted, and I was kind of looking for something to change. The other thing is that we were just leaving our soils bare. I don't really care for that. I mean, as far as a practice, I think people do it to conserve water, but there's a health factor there that I think that's really important. So we were looking for solutions to, infiltration using some different types of chemical, and there was nothing effective. So I had a good friend of mine that does a lot of has a whole bunch of almonds, and one of the things that he did was, they started this cover crop thing, and so the first thing he did was he goes, "Hey, you got to come out and see this." And we looked at it. There was worm activity. The trees looked really healthy, and I think that was something that first triggered me. And it was interesting, what he said is that they had 17 different varieties of plant species. And as I said, we'd been kind of we'd planted cover crops, but it was, a single species, whether it be wheat, rye, or whatever that crop was. And we might have got a little vetch in there, but one of the things that he'd kind of encouraged me to do was to, try this really wide variety of seed. And it had radishes in it, and it had sunflower, and it had the traditional rye, but it was a blend, so there wasn't anything that was it was singular. It was all this big variety of different plants coming up at different times. And so again, like I said, we struggled a lot here because there's a lot of advocates. As I said, we're south of the rain curtain. There's a lot of advocates that say, "Hey, do not put cover crops in because they're consumptive, they're water consumptive." So I think there's been this mantra to say, "Hey, don't put cover crops in," and because they are water consumptive, because we are in Sigma, we're in this constraint. So I looked at it and I said, okay, well, I gotta fix my infiltration on my soil. So when we put these cover crops in, what I saw originally is that, well, first off, I'm a farmer and I love seeing something grow in between my tree rows. And as it came up, it started to rain. And what I found really, really interesting, and I think one of the most important things, and I know we're talking about healthy soils, but in order for it to be, healthy, we've got to be able to put, water in, and there's got to be, biological action. But what happened is that those cover crops actually stopped the water from going out the back end of our almond orchard. So if you've ever seen an almond orchard or any type of permanent cropping, typically there's a slope, because in the beginning we were all in flood irrigation, and once we converted over, what would happen is we'd keep our lanes or our rows cleaned, and the water would just run out the back end. Once I had these cover crops in, that water started staying in place, and I really thought, well, that's really, really important, because now I'm able to start putting water in, for the springtime. And it was really important for, my salts. So those were things that, that were kind of a game changer that we saw. And then all the benefits that we get. So one of the things that I think, again, I keep going back to saying that I'm south of the rain curtain, and I think it's really important because the San Joaquin Valley is, it goes from about Stockton to Bakersfield, and it's 5 million acres. It's a really strong growing region, but due to the lack of water, we struggle down here. And so anything that we can do to, first off, open up the soils to get water in the ground, then to hold the water there was really important. And then I started seeing, salt reduction. Again, I love seeing the variety, to see a sunflower come up, or you see vetch, you see different kinds of species of plants, radishes, like I said, became kind of exciting to watch. And, I literally started to see my orchards. This has been about, and what I did, I'm pretty big on measuring and trying to run, reps or, different strategies. So I had 7 blocks of almonds, and I planted every other row. I planted every row. I planted, I didn't plant sunblocks. And so I got to see, what was going on. I've mapped all of my soil, so I know exactly what I've got. And so as I did that, I just started seeing the health of my trees become better. But the crazy thing is that, we struggle a little bit with what the drivers are, what's required of a healthy soil. And I think a lot of times people think that a permanent crop has to be, irrigated and taken through the summer. Obviously, it's a better strategy. But for us, the only thing we can do here in the South is have a winter cover crop. So there's termination in the spring. And so here's the technology, for us is it's super simple. Plant a multi-variety species, right? More than likely, you'll have to drill it in with an air seeder because the ground's hard from, our harvest. We sweep the floors of the almond trees. So there's an air seeder, and then there's this multiple variety that goes in. And then from there in the spring, we started looking at, how to terminate. And there's a lot of discussion on it. But when you don't plant all ryegrass, you can put a flail mower in there and it'll go through easily. So what we looked at and what we all started talking about was change the blades literally on our flails to a T-blade. And then we'd go in and we'd set our flails up higher so that they'd cut down to about 6-7 inches. And we'd move through the field and cut that first big stuff down, the sunflower, the wheat, the barley, whatever it got big. And then it left about an 8-foot, basically, or 8-inch grass floor. And what happened was that where we cut that stuff, that thatch, just like in your yard, fell down into the rest of the grass that hadn't been cut. And it really created, a new environment, right? But then we had vetch and we had, clovers down in there that were still really active and didn't require a lot of water. So we said, well, okay, now that we've got to go ahead and flail this to decompose that, grass so that we can harvest and it's not a problem, we changed our flail blades over to a cup, and then we lowered the flail mower down and then took out in 6 to 8 weeks the rest of the grass, and then left kind of a compost. And covering that soil like we did and creating that armor was huge for the season. Those were things that, just stood out. And again, the things that, that we get is, obviously what everybody goes after is biological activity, but we started just from infiltration. We moved to grain harvest to, how do we set our floors up, and, how do we build an armor for the summer? And that's been really exciting for us. So I like what goes on there. So that's kind of what we've seen, in that. And Chris, is my time over?
It's close. You can, right, another minute.
I'll be really quick then. So on the regenerative side, I was super lucky. I grew up in a cow family. We raised cattle. When I got out of school, I went and managed a forest and cattle or timber ranch up in the Sierras. And I had the good fortune of getting to go to a conference for 3 days with Alan Savory in 1984. I went home and saw the things that he talked about. I took this 10,000 acre ranch and basically broke it into 2 different cells, if you would, that had 7 different pastures. And I started doing regenerative, which it wasn't called at that time. It was called holistic. The ranch, after, we doubled our carrying capacity on the cattle, and our weight yields increased. But what we really saw was in 1988, the ranch burned, and we were super lucky to be using this system, because what we did was in those cells, we put those cattle in and rotated them, and they'd break down the thatch where we'd logged, where we'd planted new trees. basically, they'd eaten the grass, so we weren't using herbicides. So I was on that ranch about a year ago, and those trees are between 30 and 40 foot through. My intention, and after watching, so much of, the regenerative movement, we're kind of the north part of the citrus belt here in California. We're going to start putting citrus in and basically, break that into a cell. And from there, grow organic caracaras. So we're pretty excited about that and pretty excited about that regenerative movement. So soil health's been a game changer for me. I mean, it's been incredible. The partnership my family's had with ATF's been good. So I'm grateful to be here and amongst some really smart people.
Well, thank you, Matt. It was well worth the time that took you to get on. We are really appreciative of you being here. I just want to pose one last question to all of the panelists, which is, again, we are all in the land conservation business. And so suggestions from you all on how and some of you are farming protected land already and have done that, but just from your perspectives, how do you think that those in the land conservation world can be most helpful? And particularly with the non-innovators, and what is the best way to help and support other farmers and ranchers? Any thoughts on that?
Well, Chris, one thing that we know for sure, go ahead, Lawrence, excuse me.
Go ahead, and I'll follow your lead. Yep.
Yeah, well, I think field demonstrations with the RCDs and, just field demonstrations between farmer to farmer is our best bet. I mean, good farmers do good things, and I think it's that walk that people appreciate. So I think that would be how I'd encourage it. Farmland Trust seems to be doing a great job getting the word out, helping with markets. So those are all the things that we need to participate in.
Okay, great. Lauren?
I would agree with Matt 100%, is like get people out of the offices and in walking the pastures or walking the orchards and showing them the benefits, and dig a hole and look at the soil. I mean, what Matt's doing down there in the valley gives me massive hope for the Central Valley of California, with the amount of orchards there are and stuff, and new technology is going to come from it. There's so many bright minds that can help. And one thing that Malt is doing, I say I'm not on the Malt board or anything now, but Malt is actually taking more of a stewardship role now in helping. And I think, nobody from Malt's on the call right now, so I'm in a safe place, but it's videoed. But they can be way better at it. But basically, they're helping offset some of the costs of some of these new stewardship ideas by offering not only land, not only buying development rights, but also giving grants to add things. So there was this draws project deal where you could get up to 15 grand to help you become more drought resilient. Now, do I think that all of the things that they offered in their basket of drought resiliency are very progressive, awesome things, or just Band-Aids that allow for non-regenerative ag to continue to go on? I mean, there's the whole balance between what's right and what's not right. And I really think there's a massive opportunity to be better stewards in agriculture and get really awesome results. And I don't like seeing gross, what do you call it? What's the right word? Basically gross contributors that are doing a horrible job managing get grant funding to continue to do a horrible job managing. It's almost like if the government and land trusts, I'm not a big subsidy fan, but I think it's the only way that we can go forward to create positive change is reward farmers or ranchers for doing ecological services or benefits. And I've said this for years and years and years, is if, and I agree with every one of the speakers today, which is, it's really awesome. I want to keep networking with you guys because I can learn a lot from you. But if you reward the good results, and the good results aren't necessarily a measurement of carbon, in my situation, it's a measurement of biodiversity, both above ground and below ground. If you reward those results, agriculturists are going to overproduce everything. And ultimately, we're going to get more carbon in the soil, and we're going to change the water cycle by paying attention to the details. So I'm not sure if that was an answer that you wanted, but that's my opinion. It's
That was a
working.
great
here in
answer.
Brigham. Yeah.
That was great. Andrea and then Clay, and Clay will have the last word because we will be out of time. So Andrea, to you first, and then Clay.
Yeah, I think just following up with the great panelists that we have here. It's so fun. I feel like I'm learning more than I'm probably contributing. But so I think one is monitoring for outcomes and not best practices. Is not a best practice. And following that is that it's context. And so land use laws and ecosystem services in Wyoming are completely different from Oregon and completely different from California. And so we have a whole bunch of different folks here. And so not only is the ecology different, our ways of being are different as human beings, as well as our policies. And so being very context relevant and knowing that we are trying to influence complexity. We cannot put, this is not a complicated world that we live in. It is a complex world, and we need to gain the skills to influence that complexity to get the future relationships that we want with our land and our animals and other people.
Great, thank you. And Clay, to you.
Yeah, I guess thanks again for everybody else that's speaking too. It's been really great listening with your perspective. As far as like the incentivization of producers, I wholeheartedly agree. Like getting people to try new practices like cover cropping is the first step and gets your foot in the door. And then as you see that life blossom, then it's kind of addictive, and you want to do more and more and more. So helping, like as a land trust, helping landowners and producers take that step, like you said, just on a little piece, and then it gets the ball rolling, and then it doesn't seem as complicated. As far as an overarching thing that I see, at least in our region here in southern Idaho, is that a lot of the preservation of land in this area is focused on wildlands in some ways, and preserving in an urban environment, like really close to the city, has been challenging because of land prices being so high and development pressures being so high. So we've been really trying to fight against the march of development, I guess. And that may be beyond the scope of everyone here. And I'm not sure exactly what the solution would be other than, policy changes, but we're going to need to preserve farming close to urban environments so that people still have that relationship with farming. And I'm thinking of more food production, so vegetables, actual consumable like items that people eat every day. And the more that farmland goes away and houses are grown on it instead, the more people get separated from farming and it's disassociated. So that's what we're really trying to do, is just kind of create pockets of preservation. And I think California has done a really good job, like the Marin preservation, preserving areas in close proximity to a large population urban base is, I think, really important. And so getting that into Idaho is challenging, but I think we can do it.
Great. Yeah, those are some really helpful points. Thank you. So seeing what time it is, I think we should wrap up because we want to give people a short break before our next session. So I want to thank you, Clay, thank you. Thank Josie for us as well. It was great to have her. Andrea, thank you so much. Lauren, thank you. And Matt, really appreciate you all joining us, sharing your perspectives. Very grateful to what you do, what you produce, both above and below ground. So thank you for sharing your wisdom and insights with us. Very grateful.